as institutions, largely controlled by boards of trustees, which are largely controlled by powerful financial interests. I don't think it's the case, and this pains me as an academic to say, that we win by convincing those people on the basis of argumentation. We win on the basis of power and building powerful movements. Yeah, and so I just want to like lift that up to really think about like what would it take here, what kind of power would you need, and what kind of movements would you have to build in order to get UVA to write that check for $1 billion or whatever. You know, really concrete, like, I was involved at Duke with the occupation of our main administrative building after our executive vice president did a hit and run, basically on a young black parking attendant who had been outsourced, ran into her, got into an altercation, called her the N-word, and drove away. And he's still the executive vice president of the university, just to this day. But that experience of being part of the occupation and just confronting the real raw power behind the university, but also confronting the way that power shifts. So initially we're having this occupation, there's tents all around us. Duke says, well, this is private property. No one else can, the community can't come in. You know, this is private property, the news cameras can't come in. I was having to walk, I was supporting the folks on the inside, I was having to walk 10 blocks to go talk to the news cameras who were on the edge of campus and not, you know, saying, oh, we can't come in. Well, we knew that we had shifted something when suddenly the news camera said, fuck it, we don't care, we're gonna come see you because what's happening is so big and so important. So the rules of like what is and isn't possible, and I feel like Tony said that on an earlier panel, just changed when we built that power. So I know I'm going on too much, but the question I guess I would like to ask of y'all and maybe of this room is just what lessons can we draw on and what experiences can we have that could build the power that could actually prompt systemic change for our institutions. Yeah.
Nobody wants to answer that.
One last
Can I-
question? Oh, great.
I'm sorry, I think none of us want to answer that. No, I really think none of us can answer that.
Right, it's not that we don't
It's not
want
that
to,
we don't want
we don't have any.
I just want to add one other thing, which is interesting. We've had some success here in Charlottesville with housing formerly homeless people, chronically homeless people, the crossings and some other activities. Was Nancy here? The people at the Haven? Anyway, one of the results of getting people homeless people housing is they do not go to the emergency room as much for their medical needs. In fact, they very little. And so some universities, and I understood VCU was one of them, was calculating what their savings had been at the ER room and then giving that to the Coalition for the Homeless to increase the number of people who could get housing.
News
Very
to me,
simple
but I'll
method.
check that out.
Very simple
Yeah.
method, very simple to say, listen, we're helping you cut down on your costs, come back with that money and we'll help you more by getting people housing, and then all kinds of good things happens from that. But what strikes is that here's a very simple thing, it's been done elsewhere by university hospitals, and where's UVA at this? If you ask them, would they say, oh, we never heard of that? I mean, is somebody paying attention to what's going on in the healthcare industry, you know, at universities? I assume they are, and that they know about it, but they don't do it. And the question is why? And that goes back to why we can't answer your question.
So, as moderator on this final panel, I'll just say that I think your question is really important, but part of the reason we can't answer it is because I think a lot of people all day today actually spent a lot of time talking about building power and how, you know, so I think it has been answered in our previous panels in some really exciting and inspiring ways. So maybe we end with a nod towards all of the amazing power building work that we heard about this morning. Should I release us? Where's Laura? Oh, good. You ready? Yeah. Any more questions? We're allowed to have one more. Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Ibby, and I guess one thing I wanted to uplift kind of in response to Bennett's question was, one thing that activists did last fall was a group of Charlottesville organizers shut down the City Planning Commission, and were holding banners, one saying Seville is not for sale, one saying justice for DeAndre. So I think that was a really important action in which, and that's how we build power, is by drawing the connections between, a black counter protester was, who was assaulted, is then himself charged with assault, and also the fact that at that same City Planning Commission meeting, they were discussing, new developments that were coming that would then further gentrify the area. So I think that's one way that we need to be working together, is like pulling all of the different issues together and then linking it back to the root of white supremacy in Charlottesville. So one challenge that I want to pose to the panel is, I think we've heard a lot about how the violence of August 12th has impacted businesses downtown, but I'm wondering how it has impacted the housing crisis and what the connections you see between like that event and housing in Charlottesville.
I don't have any idea. I don't know enough about Charlottesville.
The only thing I could say is that I have seen much more sympathy in the community for the issue. That's a function of people. I'm not sure exactly why people woke up to that event when the real oppression in their lives had not been the Nazis, but had been, local politicians. But it did seem to wake up a lot of people about what the history of this country and what it was like to be black in the face of those kinds of people who had actually, some of whom governed the country. So that's all I've seen in terms of its impact.
Just a quick comment about building power, and this comes from, spending 6 months as an introvert out there trying to sell myself to conservative voters. As an introverted liberal trying to sell myself to a Democrat, an FDR Democrat in rural Virginia. So here's the thing that happened in Virginia, and you all know that as a result of the fact that almost every district in Virginia was contested this last year, which hadn't happened in forever. And so there were, let me remember now, there's 100 districts going into the election. 66 of them were Republican, 34 were Democrats. I think that there were like 52 of the 66 Republicans were contested. 42 of the people who ran were women. And it's a lot of women who came back from the Women's March and said, I got to do something. And there's a lot of it in response to Trump saying, I just can't sit around. And in my case, it was people in my little community saying, we got to run somebody against the Republicans who have not been contested here in 40 years, and who can do that. So anyway, but the result of that was that, as you know, there were 15 seats taken by the Democrats. So rather than having a 66 to 34 majority in the House of Delegates, the Republicans only had a 51 to 49, and that was only because of that one weird thing in Newport News. And 3 of the seats really were on the margins, which could really easily be won next time. But here's the thing to know about what happened, is that the issue that the Democrats ran on primarily was Medicaid expansion. And when I ran, I said, this is the moral issue of the day. We are leaving federal money on the table. We have 400,000 working Virginians who don't have health insurance. We have a massive opioid crisis in the rural community, and our member of the House of Delegates is saying, we will never have Medicaid expansion in Virginia. We are never going to take those federal dollars. There's no federal program that works. This is what this guy was doing. Anyway, but guess what? He voted for Medicaid expansion in the General Assembly this year. And so it's a little teeny step forward, and Northam may work out a budget on that, but it mattered that all those people got up and ran for office last time. It really mattered. And so I would urge you to think about that. It's not easy. It's I mean, it's really not easy. You know, these staff take over your dining room. You have to go out and talk to the Rotarians anyway, it's really a very hard thing to do. But it is something that anybody can do. And it is something that I would urge many, many folks to just, look and see, is there somebody challenging folks who I disagree with? And that includes at the local level, at the school board. In our little county, we managed to get a progressive elected to our board of supervisors, which was that was because there were 5 wackos running, and they all minused each other out. We got a progressive elected to our school board. There's just a lot of things that can happen if you decide to get involved in that. And then you have somebody to go to when you want. Now, you all may not know the history in Charlottesville, but when Dave Norris was elected to the city council in Charlottesville, part of why he was elected is that the public housing residents organized for him. Right, Joy? Where is Joy? Anyway, Dave Norris started out as a far organizer, and he decided to run for city council to work on housing issues and the public housing residents. And we have used that story across the country as the power of public housing residents to make change in their community by electing people. So anyway, that's the answer, I think. I mean, the overall movement building is really critical, but ultimately we are a democracy, and ultimately we have to have people who are in positions of power to make the right decisions.
Okay, well, thank you to our panelists. Mr. Don Gathers, we're really lucky he's here to wrap up for us, to give us some rousing words, but we're really lucky he's able to do that. So if you'd like to come to the front of put down the screen. Or up the screen.
Okay. Okay, well, I have the esteemed privilege of introducing Don Gathers. I think he probably doesn't require any introduction to many of you here, but he is a longtime community activist in the community. He is one of the members of the Blue Ribbon Commission, right? Who did well, indeed. Oh, okay, I was gonna say, you all did well, though. Who was the commission who looked at whether or not to remove the Confederate statues from Charlottesville. But, I mean, I think more importantly, he's also somebody that I can always, and I think the community can always count on for being there for us when there's something important happening at City Council or in the community in general. So without further ado, this is Don Gathers.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank everyone for this turnout, and you need to give yourselves a round of applause for spending your day here. This has been truly an incredible morning and afternoon. I hope that everyone truly enjoyed themselves and got something out of it. Laura made the mistake of telling me that I could talk about anything in the world that I wanted to. So that being the case, open your Bibles up to Deuteronomy. Okay, never mind. I would, thank you. I would like to, before we go any further, go ahead and recognize the two most important people in my life, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and my lovely bride sitting back in the back. Wave to Tisa. Hello. All right. Now, I do have some prepared remarks, but this is going to be participatory. Not like the budget session, but participatory. In as much as I want to glean from you what you all gathered and was able to get from today's event. Where do we go from here? Because so often we have these sessions, these conferences, and it pretty much dies within the room. We need to take what we've gotten from today and go out in the community and work it. Everyone here is awoke. It's been a long day, but we're still technically awoke. So we need to figure out how we translate what we've gotten today into actual action. So we sit right on the, I guess you could say, the precipice of this vast chasm of racism here in the city. And we've got to figure out how to bridge the gap, how to bring the, I hate to use this term, considering 45 loves it so much, but how do we bring the walls back together? So, if someone wants to share with me what you've gotten from today, what we need to do moving forward, what we can do moving forward, what you as an individual are willing to do moving forward. And if I don't see hands, I'm gonna start pointing people out. I know enough names that I can start calling people out. Ibby?
I guess one thing I'm gonna do moving forward is continue going to the FAR board meetings and meeting those folks and figuring out how to, I'm a student organizer, so I wanna figure out how to plug students into FAR and getting those students to help out, kind of like Brandon had mentioned earlier, and start figuring out how we can move some of UVA's money into those community orgs that really need it.
I can leave it, Mike.
Please, your favorite name.
Thank you, Peter.
I'll say nothing until.
For posterity.
So, of course, change happens one conversation at a time, and it's really important to push yourself to just go ahead and have those small bite conversations. I was doing a super hard project one time, and I was all practically turning up to one of my mentors. How am I going to do this? And he said, "What's like eating an elephant?" And I said, "Well, that doesn't really make me feel any better, actually, because eating an elephant sounds pretty hard." He said, "No, just one bite at a time." But we have to do it. Like, have conversations, bring it up, bring this stuff up that you've heard with people, and get the word out.
Thank you, Peter.
I'm sorry, I stepped outside. Oh.
I know you did, because I was going to call on you
I'm always learning
first.
stuff, but for me, what I have learned today is that there are people in this community who care. Now is what, I mean, because this, if you could have seen how packed this room was this morning, and to still have almost a packed room, some people is out eating, it just showed that there are people, who care. They may not care for the reason that I care, but you care. And so, yes, the conversations need to happen, but I'm tired of conversations. We need to lead to action. So we need to do, what I'm learning is that we need to have some action items. And my action item is to make sure that J.R. Clemens and Cornelius, who they went to their hotel or whatever, and the Housing Authority in Chicago, is that we all find out how we can, make Section 3 viable for this community. So that's what I want.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Okay. Let me do this. I'm going to give you some remarks, and they're not necessarily geared towards housing, but more so towards the issues that we face of racism here in this country and in this community. And that'll give you time to maybe wrap your heads around what I've got to say and also how it ties into the events of today. So journey with me, if you will, just briefly to a time 50 years ago, the year 1968. It's an extremely tumultuous time for this country and time of year. The Vietnam War is raging. Our young men and women are being sent off to die at a rate impossible to fathom. Racial tension and race wars are exploding throughout the land. Riots erupt in numerous major cities such as Baltimore, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., Kansas City, Detroit, and New York City. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated, and later that same year, Senator Bobby Kennedy is also assassinated. There were also the devastating protests at Columbia University, and the Olympic Games in Mexico City are still remembered primarily because over 30 African nations boycotted the Games, and also because of the protests by sprinters Tommy Smith and John Carlos. You remember them on the medal stand, black gloves in hand. Now fast forward with me some 50 years later to now. Our country still faces riots in the streets by people who feel and who are oppressed. Our country is enamored with the glamorization of war. Our young people on college and university campuses all across the nation still feel the intense need to protest unfair conditions. The modern day Olympic protest has taken the shape of NFL players taking a knee. Assassinations still run rampant in the streets, except now it's our young black men and women being shot down at an increasingly alarming rate by law enforcement. We as a people have gone through numerous terms. We've evolved from slave, boy, nigger, black, Afro-American, African-American, and now we're related in the broad generic terminology of people of color. Yet no matter what we're called, some things still continue to ring true. We're still subjugated, subversed, and subjected to the worst forms of oppression, of bigotry, and of tyranny. We still face discrimination and discriminatory practices, much like in 1968. We're still, by and large, the last hired and first fired all across this nation. We still deal with racial profiling, housing inequality, economic inequality, justice inequality, and a distinct imbalance in educational opportunities. We still face the reality of disproportionate numbers of infant mortality, and we still have to deal with the Klan. And yet we're constantly bombarded with orations delivered with us to attempt to remind us that we have had a black president, that Virginia has elected a black governor, that we now have black representation in the houses of Congress and on the Supreme Court, followed closely by the question, what more do you want? The answer to that immensely ridiculous question must come swiftly and resoundingly, we want it all. Racial inequalities in this country are as real as the demons of their not too distant cousins, white supremacy and white privilege. They all perform in a sick, twisted concert that has only one focus and one goal: the further oppression and demonization of all persons of color, wherever they may exist. They are truly no longer embarrassed by their pseudo-secret memberships. They are now emboldened. No longer do they care that their identities may be revealed. The sheets have been pulled back, and the wizard has been exposed, and they could care less. To all of my Dorothys and Totos of the world out there, we're truly not in Kansas anymore. We now face a much more sophisticated and organized enemy, one who is very well funded and, as we have seen, has friends in extremely high places, such as courtrooms and elected offices. They have developed more diverse and intricate means to obtain their vile objectives. Open housing discrimination is no longer legal. Overt land takeovers would raise too many eyebrows and suspicions. Now the course calls for buying up property in vastly minority-populated neighborhoods under the auspices of revitalization and urban renewal. Please don't be a sucker for this ploy. It's merely backdoor gentrification. Developers come in, buy up property, remodel, refurbish, revitalize. This, of course, drives up property value, which, of course, drives up the taxes, which then drives up the tax base, which then tends to drive out elderly settled persons of color, hence the same objective is achieved. Something else that for centuries has continuously rang true is this: we are resilient people. The first slave ships landed here in 1607, and we've been fighting ever since. We built this country. Practically everything here that rings of any lasting significance was built by or invented by a black individual. We are shapeshifters, holding the innate ability to morph into whatever we need to be at any given time. The times now demand that we stand up, that we demand and fight for what is and what should be ours. That we, like the phoenix, rise up from the trials of our ancestors, that we emerge from the rubble of the oppression of white privilege and white supremacy, that we increasingly insist upon what is morally legal and God-given rights, and that we let no legislator, no president, no judge hold us down, step on us, or ignore us any longer. It's way past time for us to take our rightful place in this country and in this society, our place of honor. And so I ask you all the question that you have to ask yourselves. What can I do? What am I willing to do? What do I truly have the talents and the resources to do? And how do I go about achieving the goals of this movement? Now, does any of that generate any questions from within? And if not, please check your pulse. I don't know where the defibrillator is, but if we need to pop somebody, let's do so. Come on, folks, there was a lot of great information that was given out today. There's got to be somebody. Thank you, Miss Andrew.
Donna, a lot of that resonated. I was born 1 year after the start of your conversation. I was born in 1969. So to think of the relatively long life that I've lived, probably past my halfway point, and to think that nothing has changed, or very little, or maybe even have gone backwards some, is I think about a lot. I think about the way I was raised in a predominantly white community, where I was taught to be colorblind and that everybody was equal, and to realize now overall I have learned from so many of you in this room that I'm so grateful for. That does not work, and that is not true, and that is not the way I want to raise my daughter. And as far as housing goes, I am committing to learning from you every single thing that I can to be ready to go knock on doors in the white neighborhoods in Charlottesville, to educate them, to try to get some movement from those people who owe our community as a whole some change.
Thank you, Andrew. Let me tell you all about a story of a conversation that I had with a developer who wants to erect one of these projects, just like I told you, come in, redevelop the property, drives up the tax base in an elderly and settled neighborhood, which means that now these people have to pay more in taxes, which some of them may not be able to pay, which means it drives them out of the community. I said the only way that I would sign on to this and be willing to accept it is if you could partner with the city to guarantee that these people's taxes did not go up because of your development. And he said, well, that makes sense to me, but for how long? I said, in perpetuity. And I mean that wholeheartedly. These people have done nothing to deserve to be forced out. And unless he is willing and the city is willing to agree to this, we need to be at the planning commission meetings, we need to be at the city council meetings, we need to be making our voices heard. We need to protect what is our community from outside developers coming in, making money on our backs, and then leaving, going on to the next project. It's just like I told you, it's backdoor gentrification. They're not coming in like they did at Vinegar Hill and just taking the property anymore. They've become more sophisticated. And now they're using legal tactics and legal ways to come in and gain their means. And we have got to figure out more sophisticated ways to fight this. We've got to make our voices heard. So I challenge each one of you, if you have never been, and if you haven't been, come back. Show up at a city council meeting. Sign up to speak. Show up at a planning commission meeting. Show up at a budget hearing. Show up. That's what makes government work. Show up. Because unless and until they hear from you, they can assume that everything that they're doing is just absolutely fine. Show of hands, who thinks that? Thank you. Who's that? Who else? Don't get up, that means that you want to speak. Yes, sir.
You know, I'm speaking as a organizer with Surge. I want to say that, you know, we are the new kids on the scene of organizing for housing justice in Charlottesville. And one thing that I want to take away from today is that on the one hand, we have the incredible depth and wealth of knowledge and power of the folks who have been fighting this fight for so long here in Charlottesville. And on the other hand, like looking around this room, especially this morning, the amount of fire and energy that exists in this town now around this issue. There's a real and meaningful awakening happening around housing justice and its role in overturning and uprooting white supremacy in this community. And, you know, looking at all of these solutions that have been put in forth, each has a place in this fight here in Charlottesville. And I'm really filled with hope. I think, you know, like to quote the old kind of organizing rallying cry, it's like, I believe that we will win. I think that we can do this. We have the energy, we have the knowledge, and, you know, with the coalitions that are forming around this, that we can make a change here in Charlottesville.
Thank you. We have to elect officials that will hear us more so than bank on the dollars that developers can bring in the city. We need to elect people who care more about the citizens and put their needs first than they do the businesses and what they can do for the tax base of the city. And you know, unless and until we're willing to step out and do that, we'll continue to face these same battles and have these same hurdles and hoops to jump through. So again, the challenge is there. Please come out, please participate, please be a part, make your voice heard.